After watching this, you will understand why the average man has become completely invisible in the modern dating market. And more importantly, why no one has the courage to say this out loud. You're not crazy for noticing that the rules have changed. You're not being paranoid for feeling that something fundamental has shifted in how women evaluate men. What you're feeling is real. There is a mathematical, biological, and social reason for it. But prepare yourself, because what I'm about to reveal goes against absolutely everything society has taught you about relationships. It goes against the politically correct discourse. It goes against the comfortable narratives everyone prefers to believe. And it will probably make you rethink every interaction you've had in recent years. The truth that no one wants to admit is this. In the modern female perception, the average man literally does not exist as a romantic or sexual option. He is functional, not desirable. He is useful, not attractive. He occupies the same mental space as a piece of furniture or a tool, acknowledged when necessary, ignored when not. This isn't conscious cruelty. It is simply how the new economy of attention and access has completely restructured the female value system. While your grandfather competed with maybe 20 men in his town, you are competing with thousands of profiles on apps, with celebrities and influencers who dominate female attention, with a billion-dollar entertainment industry that has elevated the standards of excitement to stratospheric levels. And here's something few realize. This change didn't happen gradually over decades. It accelerated dramatically in the last 10 years. Think about it. In 2014, Instagram had 400 million users. Today, it has over 2 billion. Tinder was launched in 2012. Bumble in 2014. An entire generation grew up with instant access to constant visual validation and infinite social comparison. What did this do to the female psyche? It created something psychologists are beginning to call perceived abundance syndrome. When you can, literally with the flick of a finger, see hundreds of male options in a matter of minutes, your brain stops processing individual men as unique people and starts processing them as products on a shelf. The rules were rewritten, but no one sent you the memo. And here's the perverse detail. Women themselves don't consciously notice this change. They genuinely believe they are reasonable, that they have normal standards, that they are just looking for someone decent. But what they call decent today is what would have been considered exceptional 2 generations ago. The game has changed, the entry criteria have changed, and the average man was simply eliminated from the competition before he even started playing. Let me give you a concrete example that perfectly illustrates this shift. I recently spoke with a 65-year-old man married for 40 years. I asked how he met his wife. At a party with mutual friends, we talked all night. I asked her out. 3 months later, we were dating. I asked if he was exceptionally attractive at the time. He laughed. I was too skinny, a bit awkward, worked a regular office job, but I was funny and she enjoyed talking to me. That man today would be invisible, completely invisible, because the modern woman doesn't have the patience for 3 months of developing attraction through conversations. She needs to feel something immediate, visceral, undeniable. Or it's a swipe left next. Let's start with the fundamental concept that no one explains clearly, the perceived value hierarchy. In the modern system, women classify men into 3 distinct categories, not consciously but through automatic. Emotional responses. Category A, men who generate genuine excitement, that visceral feeling of, I need to have his attention. Category B, men considered viable options after rational analysis, the famous, this could work. And Category C, men who are simply dismissed as non-options, invisible on the sexual radar. Here's what changed drastically. Category A has shrunk to maybe 5 to 10% of men, while Category C has exploded to include 60 to 70%. The average man, he fell straight into Category C, and no amount of working on yourself within mediocrity is going to change that. Imagine yourself in a coffee shop, watching an attractive 25-year-old woman scrolling on her phone. In that moment, she's seeing photos of men traveling to exotic destinations, driving luxury cars, with physiques sculpted in elite gyms, with seemingly exciting and abundant lives. Now you, an average man with an average job, an average car, an average life, get in line next to her. The relational math is brutal. Why should she feel excitement for you when she has visual and emotional access to men who represent the absolute top? And that's not all. While she's in line, she is also subconsciously processing dozens of microsignals: the way you dress, how you carry yourself, how you interact with the barista, your confidence level, your tone of voice. And each of these signals is being compared not with real men around you, but with idealized versions she consumes digitally 12 hours a day. She literally can't. It's not a choice, it's an automatic response. The female brain has been programmed for millions of years to seek signs of exceptional status and resources, and now those signals are hyperinflated to the point of caricature. It's economic inflation applied to relationships. What was once worth a lot is now worth almost nothing. I recently consulted with a 32-year-old man, an engineer, comfortable salary, his own condo, in reasonable physical shape. He showed me his dating app profile. 20 likes in 3 months. 20 in 3 months. Not a single real conversation. He did everything right, according to conventional advice. Photos with friends showing a social life, a photo of him doing a physical activity, a bio that was humorous but respectful, and still invisible. Not because he is inadequate, but because he is average in a system that only rewards exceptionalism. I asked to see the photos in detail. First photo, him smiling at a barbecue with friends. The problem? 3 of the 5 friends are taller and in better shape than him. Subconsciously, any woman seeing that photo will process, he's the least attractive one in the group. Second photo, him running a half marathon. The problem? Dozens of men in the background, and at least 5 are visibly more athletic. Third photo, him in a bar, holding a beer, with dim lighting that doesn't flatter his features. Each of these photos individually seems harmless, but collectively they communicate, I'm one among many. Nothing special here. And in the modern system, that's a death sentence. You must communicate exceptionalism or you disappear into the sea of mediocrity. Meanwhile, a female friend of his, with equivalent looks and status, got 200 likes on the first day. 200. On the first day. The asymmetry isn't just unfair, it is mathematically devastating to any realistic expectation for the average man. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Of the 200 likes she received, she only responded to the 5 she considered really interesting. In other words, only the top 2.5% of the men who showed interest. And even of those 5, she only held a real conversation with 2. But there's more. I asked her what made the other 195 get automatically discarded. I didn't even look at most of them. I only liked the ones that had something that caught my attention immediately. Something that caught her attention. In 2 seconds of viewing, visible height, impressive physique, a photo in an exotic location, a luxury car, something exceptional enough to break the pattern of automatic scrolling. The average man isn't competing for attention against other average men. He's competing against an edited, filtered, and curated version of the best moments of the most attractive men in existence. How do you compete with a fantasy? Observe couples on the street. Pay real attention. How many do you see where the man seems genuinely average? Few. And when you do, you often notice some compensating factor. He's visibly older and successful, or she's less attractive than average, or there's some long-standing history that predates the modern system. I did an experiment recently. I spent 3 hours in a busy shopping mall, simply observing young couples, apparently between 20 and 35 years old. Of the 50 couples I saw, 43 had the man demonstrating some clear form of exceptionalism, height above 6 feet in 32 cases, a visibly athletic physique in 28, clothing and style clearly above average in 37. Only 7 men seemed genuinely average, and of those 5 were with women who were visibly less attractive than them. The recently formed young couples. Invariably, the man demonstrates some form of visible exceptionalism, height above 6 feet, athletic physique, a carefully constructed style, evident charisma, signs of abundant resources. He might not be the absolute top, but he is definitely not average. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The average man has been sidelined, not temporarily but structurally, and here's what makes this particularly perverse. Society keeps selling the narrative that there's someone for everyone, that personality matters more than looks, that women value emotional connection. All of this is partially true, but only after you've passed the initial filter of physical attractiveness and social value demonstration. I spoke with a couples therapist who has been practicing for 25 years. I asked if she'd noticed changes in how couples form. Her answer was revealing. In the past, couples came in with communication problems, value differences, family issues. Today, most of the single men I see don't even get to the stage of forming a couple. They're stuck in a cycle of rejection that destroys them psychologically before they can even get a real first conversation. The average man invests years believing that if he develops as a person, has interesting hobbies, is kind and respectful, it will eventually result in romantic reciprocity. And when it doesn't, he internalizes it as a personal failure. I must be doing something wrong. I must be the problem. No, you are not the problem. The system is the problem. You are playing a game where the victory conditions have changed radically, but no one updated the rule book. Let me give you another concrete example. I met a group of 5 men, all friends since college, all between 28 and 32 years old. 4 of them, chronically single, frustrated, confused about why they can't generate female interest. 1 of them, in constant relationships, never single for more than 2 months. The difference, the one who gets relationships is 6'1", has an athletic physique developed over years, and works at a startup with a dynamic social environment. The other 4? Average men, normal jobs, normal looks, normal lives, and completely invisible to the same pool of women competing for the exceptional friend's attention. I spent a night with this group at a bar. The exceptional friend was directly approached by 3 women in 2 hours. 3 women literally interrupting his conversation with his friends to initiate an interaction. The other 4? 0. Not even prolonged glances, no encouraging smiles, nothing. They existed in the same physical space but might as well have been furniture for all practical effect. They are not less intelligent. They are not less interesting in conversation. They are not less capable of offering a stable relationship. But none of that matters because they don't pass the initial filter of visceral excitement that determines if a man is even considered a possibility. One of them told me something particularly revealing. You know what's worse? It's not just the rejection. It's the feeling of not existing, of being completely transparent, like I'm literally not even there. That is the experience of the modern average man, not active antagonism but total irrelevance. So how did we get here? What created this brutal reality? 3 simultaneous revolutions, technological, economic, and cultural, each amplifying the others, creating a multiplier effect that completely transformed relationship dynamics. First, the technological revolution. Dating apps are not just neutral connection tools. They are gamification mechanisms that have turned relationships into a consumable product. Swipe left, swipe right, next, next, next. This mechanic trains the brain for ultra-fast evaluation based on superficial visual cues. You have literally 2 seconds to make enough visual impact to not be discarded. 2 seconds. There is no room for nuance, depth, or the gradual development of attraction through interaction. Eye-tracking studies show that women on dating apps make a swipe decision in an average of 1,400 milliseconds, 1.5 seconds. In that time, they process height, physique, the first photo, and maybe give a quick glance at the others. There's no processing of the bio, no consideration of shared interests, no evaluation of compatibility, just, does this generate a visceral feeling or not? The average man, by definition, does not generate visual impact in 2 seconds. He needs context, conversation, a demonstration of value over time. But the system doesn't offer that time. The system rewards immediate impact or instant dismissal. And here's what's particularly devastating. Women don't just use apps to find partners. They use them for constant emotional validation, for on-demand dopamine. Opening the app and seeing 50, 100, 200 new likes generates a chemical rush of elevated self-esteem. I spoke with a neuroscientist who studies behavioral addictions. She explained, dating apps activate the same neural circuits as slot machines. The uncertainty of how many likes you'll get, who will show up, creates a variable reward cycle. And variable reward is the most addictive type of conditioning that exists. This creates a vicious cycle. The more validation she receives, the more she internalizes that as her actual market value, the more she believes she deserves to choose only from the absolute top of the available options, and the more the average man becomes irrelevant by comparison. Second revolution, economic. For the first time in history, women have complete financial independence on a massive scale. This is objectively positive, but it has an unexpected consequence. It completely removes the incentive to consider average men as viable partners. When your grandmother was 25, her economic security depended directly on choosing a partner capable of providing. This created a rational incentive to evaluate average men with stable jobs as good options. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about pragmatic survival. Look at historical data. In 1960, only 38% of women worked outside the home. Of those, most earned significantly less than their male counterparts. Marriage wasn't just desirable, it was economically necessary for most women. The average man with a stable job represented security, predictability, a viable future. Today, the modern woman doesn't need the average man's salary. She can comfortably support her own life. So why would she choose an average man when she can endlessly pursue exceptional men, even if her chances of success are low? Statistics from 2023 show that in urban areas, single women aged 25 to 35 earn on average 98% of what their male counterparts earn. In some cities, they surpass them. The economic need for a male partner has evaporated. The math has changed. The risk-reward has been completely recalibrated. She literally has nothing to lose by maintaining unrealistically high standards. Worst case, she stays single for a few more years. Best case, she manages to capture a top 10% man. The average man used to represent economic security. Now he represents nothing the modern woman can't get for herself. And pure attraction? He never had that in abundance, but he compensated with pragmatic utility. That compensation no longer exists. Third revolution, cultural. The last 2 decades have seen an explosion of cultural narratives emphasizing female self-worth and the rejection of compromises. You deserve the best. Never settle for less. Keep your standards high. You don't need a man to be complete. All of this sounds empowering, and on some level it is. But it has an unintentional side effect. It inflates expectations beyond what reality can offer for most. Analyze the content consumed by young women. Podcasts, books, influencers, TV series, movies. The consistent message, you are a queen, you deserve royalty, never accept less than extraordinary. A man who doesn't treat you as his absolute priority, discard him. A man who doesn't have an exciting life. Next, a man who doesn't give you constant butterflies in your stomach. He's not the one. When you bombard an entire generation of women with messages that they deserve the exceptional, what do you think happens to the perception of the average? It becomes not just inadequate, but almost offensive, as if considering him would be lowering your standards, betraying yourself, accepting less than you deserve. I've observed this pattern repeatedly. Women in their early 20s with perfectly average looks and situations talking about their minimum standards, 5'9" or taller, athletic physique, established career, dynamic social life, natural charisma, perfect emotional stability. And when I ask how many men they know who meet all these criteria, maybe 2 or 3, who are unavailable or not interested. But the cultural narrative doesn't allow for acknowledging that the standards might be unrealistic. To do so would be settling. It would be not valuing yourself. So, she maintains the standards, spends years chasing the unattainable, and the average man remains invisible because considering him would be admitting that she is average, not exceptional. Now add social media to the mix. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, infinite content of people living seemingly perfect lives, exotic trips, expensive restaurants, designer clothes, exciting experiences, seemingly magical relationships where the man is always attentive, romantic, and surprising. A content analysis I did recently. I spent a week following the feeds of 10 popular female influencers, a total of 100 posts. How many showed common, mundane, normal moments? 3 out of 100. The rest, all carefully curated to look extraordinary. This creates expectations completely divorced from everyday reality. The average man cannot compete with a 24/7 edited version of an influencer's life. He cannot offer constant excitement. He cannot create Instagram-worthy moments every day. He lives a normal life. He works. He pays bills. He has moments of boredom, like everyone. But the modern woman has been conditioned to expect the extraordinary as the standard. And when the average man offers the ordinary, she feels like she's being cheated, that she deserves more, that she must keep looking until she finds the real version of that fabricated ideal she consumes digitally. A client recently showed me her Instagram feed, page after page of seemingly perfect couples, men surprising their partners with elaborate gifts, romantic getaways, cinematic proposals, public displays of affection carefully choreographed for maximum visual impact. I asked her, "How many of these couples do you think are actually happy day to day?" She paused. "Probably few, but that's the impression you get." Exactly. The impression is what matters, and that impression is completely destroying any possibility of the average man being seen as desirable. Let me add one more. Critical factor: the collapse of traditional social structures. Your grandparents probably met through family, church, or the local community. These environments forced repeated interaction over time. They created a shared context. They allowed attraction to develop gradually. Historical data shows that in 1950, 63% of couples met through family or mutual friends, 18% through religious or community organizations, only 8% through casual encounters at bars or events, the rest through work or school. The average man thrived in these environments because he had time to demonstrate value through consistent actions, through reliability, through the slow building of a genuine connection. Today, these environments practically don't exist for young people. Church, attendance has plummeted. Local community, people barely know their neighbors. Even work environments have changed. Remote work, temporary contracts, high turnover. Nothing allows for that gradual development of attraction anymore. Data from 2023, 39% of heterosexual couples met online, 27% in bars or at social events, only 20% through friends, 8% at work, and 6% through family or church. So what's left? Apps where you have 2 seconds, bars and clubs where you compete with loud music and alcohol, occasional social events, where everyone already has their established groups. None of these environments favor the average man. They all favor immediate impact, natural charisma, visual signs of status. The system has been completely restructured against the average man, and no one planned this consciously. It was the organic evolution of multiple converging forces, but the result is inescapable. The average man has been architecturally eliminated from the competition. Now let's move to the specific patterns that emerge from this new reality. Behaviors you see repeatedly once you learn to recognize them. First pattern, the illusion of abundance. Consider the case of an average woman on any dating app. In 24 hours, she receives 50, 100, 200 likes and messages. Of those, let's say 20 men are genuinely interesting on paper. They look good in their photos. They write decent messages. They demonstrate social value. Now ask a simple question. What happens to her perception of her own value when she has 20 seemingly viable options competing for her attention? She starts to believe that this is her natural market level. She internalizes that she deserves to choose from the best of these 20, not the average among them. Her frame of reference has been completely distorted. And here's the cruel paradox. Those 20 men are also messaging 50 other women. None of them are truly interested in her specifically. They are playing a numbers game, but she doesn't know that. She only sees the apparent abundance and adjusts her expectations upward. Meanwhile, the average man sends 10 carefully written messages and gets 0 replies. Not because he said something wrong, not because his profile is bad, but because he is literally competing with a mathematical illusion that has made his existence irrelevant. I consulted with a 28-year-old woman who had spent 3 years seriously looking for a relationship. She showed me her app, 1,600 accumulated likes. 1,600. I asked how many she had replied to. About 100, but only about 10 were worth talking to, and of those, none worked out. Look at the math. She dismissed 1,500 men without even starting a conversation. Of the 100 she replied to, 90 didn't pass the worth continuing a conversation filter, and the 10 who did, none resulted in a relationship. Why? Because those 10 were men from the top of the pyramid who had dozens of other options. They weren't committed to her specifically. They were exploring options and eventually chose someone else. But at no point did she consider, maybe I should give a chance to the 1,500 I immediately dismissed. Because to do so would be to admit she doesn't exclusively deserve the top. It would be lowering her standards. So she continues, year after year, chasing the same 5 to 10% of men that all the other women are also chasing. Second pattern, the silent redefinition of basic. Your grandfather could have a stable job, a modest house, and respectable behavior, and that was enough to be considered a good catch. Today, that's literally the bare minimum just to enter the conversation. A stable job is no longer an asset. It's a basic requirement, like having personal hygiene. Owning a home doesn't impress. It's expected by 30. Being faithful and respectful, that's no longer a differentiator, it's the assumed default. So what's left for the average man to stand out? Physically, he competes with Instagram models and professional athletes. Financially, he competes with successful entrepreneurs and executives. Socially, he competes with influencers and charismatic personalities. And in terms of excitement, he competes with an entire entertainment industry designed to generate constant dopamine. Do a simple test. Ask a modern woman what she's looking for in a partner. She'll say things like, someone funny, smart, with a purpose in life, who makes me feel special. Sounds reasonable, right? Now translate that. Funny means more charismatic than 90% of men. Smart means a college degree and sophisticated conversation. A purpose in life means an impressive career or an exceptional passion. Making her feel special means constantly exceeding the high expectations set by years of digital validation. The average man has no chance of fulfilling this list, but no one admits the list is absurd. I observed this recently at a dinner with friends. A 31-year-old woman, single for 4 years, listed her requirements. Nothing crazy. I just want someone tall, in shape, with a stable career, who travels regularly, has interesting hobbies, is a good conversationalist, constantly surprises me, and makes me feel like a priority. I mentally calculated. She just described maybe 1 to 2% of the male population. And of those, how many would be available, interested in her specifically and compatible in other ways? Statistically close to 0. But when I suggested that maybe the criteria were a bit high, the reaction was immediate. So you think I should settle? That I don't deserve to find someone truly compatible? See how the cultural narrative has completely taken over. Acknowledging mathematical reality is reinterpreted as not valuing oneself. Third pattern, ghosting and casual disposal. When you have perceived abundance, any imperfection becomes sufficient reason for dismissal. The average man cannot make one mistake. He can't have a bad day. He can't fail to constantly impress because he is replaceable. A message that doesn't generate an immediate laugh? Next. A photo where the angle isn't flattering? Next. A comment that doesn't demonstrate exceptional charisma? Next. The average man is treated like a defective product that can be returned without notice or explanation. I consulted a man who had 5 promising conversations on apps. They all ended in sudden ghosting. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. He internalized it as personal failure. I must have said something wrong. I must be uninteresting. But analyzing the conversations, there was nothing objectively wrong. He simply wasn't exceptional enough to compete with the other options they were exploring simultaneously. And once a marginally better option appeared, he was unceremoniously discarded. This didn't happen 20 years ago. Not because women were more polite, but because they didn't have an infinite abundance of options. Discarding someone had a cost. It meant returning to a limited pool of candidates. So there was an incentive to give chances, develop connections, work through imperfections. Today, the cost of disposal is 0. There are always more options. There's always the possibility of finding someone marginally better. So why invest in developing a connection with the average man when you can keep swiping until you find exceptionalism? Fourth pattern, the strategic friend zone. The average man is often kept in orbit as an emotional backup option. He provides validation, attention, and emotional support without receiving romantic reciprocity. The modern woman often keeps 3 to 5 men in this zone simultaneously, not as a conscious manipulation but as an emotional hedge. If the top-tier options don't work out, there are always the backups that she doesn't want to ruin the friendship with. The average man usually doesn't realize he's in this position. He believes he's building a connection that will eventually turn romantic. He invests time, emotional energy, sometimes even financial resources. And he's left confused when she eventually announces she's in a relationship with another man who appeared out of nowhere. This other man didn't appear out of nowhere. He was in her options pool the whole time. He was category A, not category C. She always knew that if something happened with him, it would be romantic. The average friend? He was never really in the running. I consulted a 35-year-old man who spent 2 years as a woman's best friend. Weekly dinners, daily conversations, constant emotional support during her breakups with other men. He was convinced she would eventually see his value. When he finally confessed his romantic feelings, the response was, "Wow, you're so important to me, I can't risk ruining our friendship." Translation: you are valuable as free emotional support, not as a romantic option. She never saw him that way. She never would. 6 months later, she met someone on an app. 3 weeks later, they were dating. The "I don't want to ruin our friendship" didn't apply to the top-tier man who generated immediate excitement. It only applied to the average backup she wanted to keep on hand. Fifth pattern: the top-tier carousel. Modern women often spend years cycling between top-tier men who won't commit. A 3-month relationship, 6 months single chasing another top-tier guy, a 4-month relationship, 8 months single. The cycle repeats. She isn't learning lessons. She isn't adjusting her expectations. She is simply waiting for one of the top-tier men to eventually decide that she is exceptional enough for a serious commitment. And here's what's particularly tragic. During all this time, dozens of average men are watching her from afar. Men who would choose her without hesitation, who would build a stable life with her, who would be faithful and committed. But she doesn't see them. They are invisible. Because once you've experienced the excitement of being with top-tier men, accepting the average feels intolerable. It's like asking someone who has eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants to be content with fast food forever. Eventually, many of these women reach their mid-30s, 40s, and make the mature choice to accept an average man. But there's no genuine passion, no real excitement. It's resignation disguised as knowing what really matters now. And the average man who finally gets her attention, he often doesn't realize he's the resignation option, not the desire option. He's grateful to finally be chosen, without understanding that he's being used as plan B after plan A proved unattainable. So what are the real consequences of this dynamic? What happens when you have an entire generation of average men who are completely invisible to women? First consequence, the collapse of new relationship formation. The rates of young people in stable relationships have plummeted over the past 2 decades. This is not a coincidence. It's not because people are focused on their careers. It's because the system no longer facilitates balanced pairing. The top-tier men circulate among multiple partners without serious commitment. The bottom-tier men can't even get into the game. And the middle? It's being squeezed out of relevant existence. Women spend years chasing the same 5 to 10% of men who will never commit. Average men spend years being ignored, eventually giving up on trying. The result? Massive loneliness on both sides, but for completely different reasons. She is lonely because the man she wants doesn't want her back seriously. He is lonely because the woman he wants doesn't see him as an option. No one is satisfied, but the system keeps operating because each side believes the problem lies in making better individual choices, not in the structure of the game itself. I recently met with a group of 7 women, all between 28 and 34, all complaining about the lack of good men. When I asked how many men had shown genuine interest in them in the last year, the average answer was 15 to 20. So it's not a lack of men. It's a lack of men they consider good enough, but they can't verbalize this because it sounds superficial. So the narrative becomes there are no good men when the reality is there are dozens of decent men who don't generate excitement in me. Second consequence, an explosion of male frustration. When you have millions of men being constantly rejected without understanding why, you create massive social pressure. Some respond with anger, some with total withdrawal, some with desperate attempts to become exceptional in some dimension, some with growing bitterness directed at women. None of these responses are healthy, but they are all understandable given the context. The average man was conditioned to believe that if he works hard, is respectful, and develops himself as a person, he will eventually be rewarded with romantic reciprocity. This was the social contract that sustained civilization for millennia. Now that contract is broken. Working hard guarantees nothing. Being respectful doesn't generate attraction. Developing yourself as a person is necessary but not sufficient. And no one is offering honest guidance on how to navigate this new reality. So he tries to follow the conventional advice. Be confident. How can you be confident when you're constantly rejected? Work on yourself. He does, but the results don't change. Be yourself. He is himself, and he's invisible. Eventually, he concludes one of three things. The system is broken, he is fundamentally inadequate, or women are. The problem? None of these conclusions lead anywhere productive, but they are the only ones that make sense given his lived experience. Third consequence, severe social fragmentation. When you have a massive portion of the male population unable to form pairs, you create fundamental social instability. Historically, societies functioned by creating clear paths for average men to achieve respectable status and form families. Work honestly, contribute to the community, find a compatible partner, build a life together. That path no longer exists for most men, and when men have no stake in the system, no family to protect, no sense of social belonging, they become potential destabilizers. I'm not necessarily talking about literal violence. I'm talking about disengagement, about ceasing to participate in social rituals, about stopping contributions beyond the bare minimum for survival, about retreating into virtual worlds where they at least have a sense of agency and recognition. We are observing this happening on a massive scale. Young men are increasingly isolated, participating less and less in social events, spending more and more time on video games, pornography, and online communities. Not because they are lazy or weak, because the real world offers no viable paths to recognition and romantic success. A functional society needs to offer realistic hope to the majority, not guarantees, but a genuine possibility that effort leads to results. When you remove that possibility, you undermine the foundation that holds the social structure together. Fourth consequence, the hidden cost of visibility. Here's something I've observed repeatedly. When an average man finally gets female attention, he often makes the mistake of trying to hold on to that attention by providing constant value. He becomes the guy who's always available, always willing to help, always offering his time and resources, and the more he gives, the less she values it. Why? Because he's operating under old rules where demonstrating value generated attraction. But in the modern system, perceived abundance generates real scarcity. The woman thinks, if he's so available for me, it means he doesn't have other options. If he doesn't have other options, it's probably because other women also classified him as Category C. It's a vicious cycle of devaluation. The average man can't win by playing the game honestly because the fundamental rules have changed. Genuine attraction today requires demonstrating options, scarcity, and competitive value. It requires you to be perceived as someone other women desire. But how do you demonstrate that when you're invisible to most? That's the trap. You need female attention to generate female attention, but you can't generate the initial attention without already having female social validation. I consulted a man who finally got genuine interest from a woman after years of trying. He was so relieved that he did everything she asked. Always available, always generous, always committed. 3 months later, she broke up with him, saying she didn't feel that initial spark anymore. When I pressed her on what had changed, she couldn't articulate it clearly. She just knew the excitement had evaporated. What really happened? He demonstrated such constant value and complete availability that she subconsciously reclassified him. From, wow, I got this cool guy's attention, to, this guy has no other options, why am I with him? Fifth consequence, the generation of lonely women. Here is the tragic irony. The system that eliminated the average man isn't serving women well either. Yes, they have an abundance of attention. Yes, they can be selective. Yes, they can pursue the top tier without restriction. But what has this actually produced? A generation of women spending years cycling between short-term relationships with non-committal men and periods of loneliness chasing the unattainable, reaching their mid-30s, 40s, realizing the top-tier men they wanted never wanted them seriously, and the average men who would have built a stable life with them. They've disappeared, become bitter, or found younger partners who haven't been fully captured by the system yet. She gained freedom of choice, but lost the structure that facilitated realistic pairing. She can reject dozens of men with no immediate cost, but the cumulative cost is years of loneliness and the eventual realization that she chased fantasies while ignoring viable realities. And here's the cruelest detail. Even when she eventually matures and decides to accept an average man, it's often too late. He has already married someone younger, or he has become so embittered that he no longer trusts anyone, or he has simply learned to be happy alone and no longer wants the drama. The system has no real winners. It only has different forms of loss. So, what can the average man realistically do in this system? First principle, accept the truth completely. Not partially, not with partial denial, completely. You are not inadequate. The system has changed in a way that architecturally disadvantages you. This is not a judgment of your human worth. It is an observation of a structural relational dynamic. Once you genuinely accept this, you stop internalizing rejection as personal failure. You stop blaming yourself. You stop trying to fix aspects of yourself that aren't broken. And most importantly, you stop investing emotional energy chasing validation from a system that was not designed to validate you. This is liberating, because it means you can redirect all that energy you were spending on apps, on trying to impress, on chasing female attention that was never going to. Come into building a life that satisfies you regardless. Second principle, build real exceptionalism in some dimension, or accept mediocrity and stop expecting exceptional results. There is no third option. The system only rewards exceptionalism. If you want relational results, you need to become exceptional at something that generates visceral attraction. Physique? It requires years of serious dedication. Financial resources? It requires building a successful career or business. Social charisma? It requires intentional development of social skills. But be honest with yourself. Do you really want to invest years of extreme effort just to have a chance in the dating market? For many men, the honest answer is no. And that's okay. There is no obligation to play a game you didn't choose. The alternative is to accept that relationships may not happen, or will happen with women who are also average and have realistically adjusted their expectations, and to build a satisfying life in other dimensions, deep friendships, meaningful hobbies, a fulfilling career, contributions to causes that matter. Third principle, if you decide to play the game, understand the real rules, not the ones they told you. Modern female attraction responds to signals of exceptionalism, options and scarcity, not decency, availability and emotional investment. This means, counterintuitively, that you need to seem less interested than you are. You need to demonstrate that you have other options, even if you don't. You need to create the perception that you are evaluating her, not the other way around. Is this manipulation? Maybe, but the entire system is manipulation. Edited photos, curated lives, fabricated versions of reality. You're just playing by the rules the system established. But here's the warning, this game is emotionally exhausting. It requires you to constantly perform a version of yourself that may not be authentic. It requires you to treat relationships as a strategic competition, not as a human connection. For many men, the psychological cost isn't worth the potential outcome, and it's okay to recognize that and choose not to play. Fourth principle, seriously consider alternatives to the conventional model. If traditional relationships require becoming exceptional or accepting resignation, maybe the traditional model is no longer viable for the average man. There are alternatives. Non-conventional relationships, pragmatic partnerships without the pretense of eternal passion, investing in deep friendships as a primary source of human connection, the voluntary acceptance of singlehood as a valid choice. Society will judge all of these alternatives, but society is also not offering you any realistic paths. So why should you care about the approval of a system that has abandoned you? Fifth principle: protect your mental health and self-esteem. The system will constantly try to make you believe that rejection is your fault, that if you were good enough, you would be chosen. Resist this narrative. Rejection in the modern system is mathematical, not personal. You can be an objectively decent, capable, and interesting man and still be invisible, because you are competing against hyperinflated standards that have nothing to do with your actual adequacy. Maintain a circle of friends who support you. Invest in therapy if necessary. Develop sources of self-esteem that don't depend on female validation. Build an identity based on your accomplishments, your values, your contributions, not on your ability to attract women. Sixth principle: understand that time can work in your favor if you use it strategically. Women have a massive advantage in the dating market from their 20s to their 30s. Average men who survive this period emotionally intact often see a reversal of dynamics in their mid-30s and 40s. Why? Because many women eventually recalibrate their expectations, because men who have built solid careers and financial stability become more attractive, because the male physique, on average, ages better than the female one. But this only works if you haven't destroyed your psyche chasing validation during your years of disadvantage, if you have built a solid life regardless of relationships, if you have not become bitter and resentful. An average man at 25, invisible. The same man at 40, with an established career, accumulated resources, and developed maturity. Potentially attractive to 35-year-old women who have finally adjusted their expectations. But you have to get there psychologically. Healthy. And that requires you to stop measuring yourself by the standards of a broken system during your years of disadvantage. Let me synthesize everything into one final, inescapable truth. The modern average man faces a completely restructured system where his chances of generating genuine female attraction are statistically close to zero. Not because he is inadequate, not because women are malicious, but because three simultaneous revolutions converged to create a relational dynamic that architecturally eliminates mediocrity from the competition. Technology removed geographical constraints and created a perception of infinite abundance. Female economic independence removed the pragmatic need to consider average men. Modern culture inflated expectations beyond what reality can offer for most. The result? An extremely concentrated hierarchy, where the top 5 to 10% receive 70 to 80% of female attention, while 60 to 70% of the male base is completely invisible, and the middle is being squeezed into irrelevance. You can work on yourself, improve your physique, develop your career, refine your social skills, and you should do this, not to get female validation, but because it will make you a better version of yourself. But be brutally honest about what these improvements will actually do. They might move you from category C to category B, from invisible to a backup option. They will rarely move you to category A, to an object of genuine desire, unless you achieve real exceptionalism in multiple dimensions simultaneously. And here is the final paradox that no one wants to accept. The only way to thrive in this system is to stop playing by the rules they told you exist. It's recognizing that seeking female validation as an average man is a losing game. It's redirecting your energy to build a life that satisfies you regardless of external approval. Because ironically, it is only when you stop needing female attention that you have any real chance of getting it. Modern women have been conditioned to chase the unattainable and ignore the available. Become unattainable, not through cheap mind games, but through the genuine construction of exceptionalism in some dimension of your life. Or accept mediocrity and stop expecting exceptional results. There is no third option. The system will not change. The expectations will not lower. The technology will not disappear. The only variable you control is your response to this brutal reality. Most will choose comfortable denial. Some will choose impotent rage. A few will choose strategic acceptance and directed action. This video is for those few, for those who prefer an uncomfortable truth to a comforting illusion, for those who understand that recognizing the game is the first step in deciding how to play, or if it's worth playing at all. Because in the end, the average man has not lost objective value. He has simply become irrelevant in a market that was not designed to reward mediocrity, but to concentrate resources at the extremes. And once you understand this completely, you can't unsee it. Every interaction, every rejection, every ghosting, every let's just be friends, it all makes sense through this lens. It's not about you personally. It's about your position in a system that has completely redefined what it means to be desirable. And maybe, just maybe, understanding this is liberating, because it means you can stop blaming yourself for a game that was rigged before you even started to play. You can stop chasing validation that the system was not designed to give you. You can build a meaningful life in dimensions that truly matter, and paradoxically, it is this freedom from the need for external approval that might eventually make you attractive. But even if it doesn't, you will have built a life that is worthwhile regardless. And that is a victory that no broken system can ever take away from you. This is the truth that no one wants to say out loud, because it challenges comforting narratives, because it exposes uncomfortable truths about how modern society really works, because it forces the recognition that not everything can be solved with individual effort when the systemic structure is working against you. But it is the truth, and you deserve to hear it unfiltered, unprotected, without any comforting lies. Now you know. What you do with this information is your choice, but at least now you understand the real game being played, and knowledge, even painful knowledge, is always better than comforting ignorance.